The world has been brought to a grinding halt. The aviation industry, as the spearhead of a globalized world, is particularly suffering from the consequences. Air travel has almost ceased, with borders around the world being closed. So where are we today? What challenges are employees and employers facing right now, and where can the industry go from here? There have been many crises in the aviation history. The oil crisis in the 70s, the Gulf War, the 9/11 attacks, or the economic crisis in 2008. But can we draw any conclusions from previous events to this one?
I don't think we can draw any conclusions from previous industries, because all airlines are locked down at the moment, have really no activity, so they have to restart a whole traffic program. And it's not just saying, well, now we have 100 passengers wanting to go from Copenhagen to Sweden or to Stockholm, let's fly. It doesn't work that way. You know, you have to lay out a traffic program for at least some months into the future.
I've probably started around 90% of my journeys from 3 airports in the world: Munich, Geneva and Billund. I've never seen the airport like this. It's almost like someone pulled the plug.
It's no doubt that this is the worst crisis that the airline industry has ever experienced. This is way worse than the financial crisis in 2008. So we have a situation where almost all airlines in the world have lost between 95 and 100% of their revenue in the last part of March and the first part of April.
The general situation is that the COVID-19 crisis has brought many airlines to a complete operational stop with planes on the ground. But in fact, not all segments have stopped flying. About 1/3 of the operator segments, such as cargo operators, are flying full schedule to transport goods. Business jet operators and ambulance flights and military clients are also flying, even though somewhat reduced, all depending on operational restrictions or border restrictions, but they are operating.
I guess it's in the nature of any crisis that it hits out of the blue. But going from a situation where airlines couldn't get enough aircraft in the air to now struggling to find places where to park those planes is a bit crazy. I wonder what it's like for the crews of those planes.
Det er en rigtig svær situation at sidde og ikke vide, om man har købt eller solgt. Det har jo gået ud, at der skal fyres 1.900 mennesker fra Stockholmsbasen. Den største administration sidder jo også i Stockholm, og de er også en del af det. Men så er der 600 AH, altså airhost, som skal blive fyret fra Stockholmsbasen. Så det er en svær situation at sidde i og ikke vide, om man har købt eller solgt, og man sidder nærmest på standby hele tiden. Vi får jo vores schema opdateret hver mandag inden for næstkommende uge for at se, hvordan vores produktion ser ud. Og nu har jeg så ikke fløjet i snart 2 måneder. Så jeg sidder og venter på at få noget besked. Og det, som jeg senest har hørt, det er, at SAS og den svenske fagforening Unionen skal have forhandlinger i slutningen af juni. Så frem til slutningen af juni 2020, så ved jeg ikke noget endnu.
Governments around the world have announced massive help packages for the big airlines, but are there any resources left for the smaller ones?
The large countries and also the smaller ones, including Denmark, all of those that has a national trophy airline, a legacy airline operating, that they have decided unilaterally to sponsor these airlines to the maximum extent, whatever is needed. At the same time, they will avoid any compensation or substantial support to the small airlines, basically killing them off and leaving a better environment for the old-backed airline to continue without competition. We are basically going back prior to the deregulation, where you had the national carrier, and that was it. And there just does not seem like they are that interested in keeping the rest of the airlines alive, unfortunately.
We see many different approaches of saving the industry, with government bailouts, nationalization, voluntary administration. What approach do you see as the most sustainable solution for the industry, or does such a thing as a sustainable solution even exist?
I think the only sustainable solution for the airlines is more equity. A lot of the help from the states is in the form of state guarantees. And they can be used to go to the bank and the financial partners to take on some debt. But a lot of these airlines, almost every airline in Europe, has already too much debt, probably except Wizz, Ryanair and EasyJet. But all other airlines, they really do not need more debt. So these steep losses that we see at the moment, while the aircraft are parked on the ground, they will, to begin with, be absorbed by taking on more debt. But that's not a sustainable situation. So a lot of these airlines will have to increase their capital, issue more shares.
Before the crisis, airlines couldn't get enough aircraft in the air, which led to a boom in the wet lease sector. But all this additional capacity isn't needed anymore. Or is it?
The ASMI sector will be in trouble after this. We had 2 aircraft on contract to Norwegian, which obviously got cancelled and is sitting on the ground now. We are working with Norwegian for a solution around the contractual commitments that are in it. But those 2 Airbuses are obviously on the ground. We have the big advantage that we own the fleet. So for us, putting the aircraft on the ground, including the 2 Airbuses, which in about a year will be our aircraft, has cost, but it is not something that will kill us in the long run. Our competitors in the ACMI market, especially those from the Baltic countries, have their whole fleet grounded. I think there's 48 or 52 Airbuses and Boeings grounded in Lithuania right now without work. They're all leased aircraft. They right now are taking the advantage of the fact that everybody is in trouble. There are 16,000, 17,000 aircraft on the ground. So they can tell the leasing companies, yeah, well, we can't pay and you can default us and you can come pick up your aircraft. And the leasing companies are going to say, well, no, we don't need those airplanes back right now. We don't know where to put them. Can you please look after them? And then we can go on soft contract until this ordeal is over and starts working again. But once things starts picking up again, the leasing companies will immediately tighten the grip. And we could expect to see some failures in that sector as well.
One thing that airlines obviously have done before the crisis and was a very popular tool for airlines was fuel hedging. However, since the beginning of the crisis, oil prices have plummeted. Is this still a tool for the future, or are there alternatives?
Well, I think fuel hedging has definitely come back to bite them, because they're not using the fuel, and when the oil prices have dropped dramatically, this actually leaves the airlines with very high financial costs relating to their fuel hedges, because they aren't using the fuel. But I think going forward, first of all, I think we will see oil prices ticking up as we go along, and activity levels increase around the world. And still, I think that in different airlines, there are actually quite good arguments for using fuel hedges. So some of the bookings are way into the future, and in order to secure profitable pricing levels into the future, when passengers are booking travels 3 or 6 months ahead, it's of course important to know your costs. And in that regard, I think fuel hedging is definitely still a part of the game in the future.
The million-dollar question at the moment is probably, how long will the recovery take?
It'll take a long time. I think on the business travelers, they will be earlier in their adoption of flying again, but I think it will take a long time, very long time, before the business market will be back where it used to be. And remember, this is the bread and butter of a lot of the old network companies. But I think a lot of business passengers will have learned to use video meetings and the digital solutions. And I think that their bosses will be spurred by the more effective, both time-wise and economy-wise, use of other means than flying all around the world all the time.
Restart of the airline industry will take time, as traffic is expected to rise only gradually and for a number of reasons. One is that based on the COVID-19 crisis and experiences, private as well as business travelers may be reluctant to travel due to uncertainties about how airlines will handle the flight operations practically. Say, will the aircraft be disinfected after each flight? Will there be disinfection materials in the onboard toilet and so on? And due to that, travelers will also consider the situation and the restrictions in those countries they want to fly to before planning the visit, as the situation must be fairly stable in order that air traffic can increase.
British Airways, or IAG, say that they expect to substantially pick up flying in the third quarter. Air France points to a third quarter reduction of around 80% compared to their normal activity level. At the end of the year, into the fourth quarter, will probably be around, I think, 6 out of 10 aircraft in best case will be airborne. And looking into 2021, I think most airlines also expect lower activity. Air France KLM points to around 20% lower activity in 21 compared to what they would have expected otherwise. So we will be moving into 2022, 2023 before we see a more normalized activity level in this industry. And from my point of view, I think leisure travel will definitely come back. It'll take some time because it's not a question of price anymore. It's a question of certainty. Of course, in this regard, a vaccine, corona vaccine, will be really a joker in this regard. But I think it'll take some time to get the leisure travelers back. But I think when they begin to fly again, the curve will be rather steep.
We can talk economics all day long, but this is much more than just money. It's people who are affected by this. And I'm not thinking about us who have been privileged enough to travel around the world whenever we wanted to, but all those whose dedication and passion to this industry used to make all of this move on a daily basis. Where do they go from here?
Altså, der er ikke nogen tvivl om, at branchen kommer til at se anderledes ud efter den her krise. SAS er gået ud med, at de ikke tror, at vores flyproduktion bliver den samme, som den var inden krisen, før at vi når 2022. Så det er jo 2 år, hvor at det bliver mindre produktion. Der er jo mange kollegaer, som jeg har flyvende kollegaer på SAS, som har en anden uddannelse i baggrunden, en anden uddannelse, som arbejder inden for sundhedssektoren, lærer. Mange studerende er der selvfølgelig også, som arbejder på timer. Men vi bliver nødt til at finde noget andet arbejde.
Walking here in a completely empty terminal is almost surreal, but I can't help but thinking that something good has to come from this. Can a crisis be an accelerant for innovation?
The fact is that airlines who have reduced flights, they still keep a minimum management and specialist staff active, and they keep them active in order to be able to scale up the airline company when the crisis lifts. And in several cases, we see clear signs that airlines have started to use the time to reevaluate both ground-based and cockpit-based software needs to plan operational improvements despite the crisis affecting them, because they simply want to be better prepared for the restart phase when it materializes. So several airlines are looking into further optimizations by implementing advanced flight planning solutions, 3D flight profile optimization applications, as well as electronic flight bag software systems used by the crews in the cockpit. Such solutions will optimize the fuel calculations prepared on the ground. It will minimize turnaround times for the crew. It will optimize the crew's decision-making while in flight, because in the future, the airlines who have the best optimization solutions will have the parameter in place to, let's say, stay in the marketplace.
When all of this has passed and the world has returned to somewhat normal, do you still see yourself in the cabin?
Ja, det håber jeg da virkelig. Jeg kan virkelig godt lide mit arbejde, og jeg synes, at det er super tragisk. Det er rigtig ærgerligt og kedeligt, at det som sker lige nu. Og jeg har arbejdet som flyvende personale i lidt over 2 år. Og jeg synes det er super ærgerligt, og jeg vil rigtig, rigtig gerne tilbage igen. Virkelig gerne. Om det så bliver på SAS eller et andet flyselskab, det er... Vi må se hvem som findes efter den her krise. Men jo, jeg vil rigtig gerne over flyve igen. Meget, meget gerne. Jeg savner det rigtig meget.
The crisis and its effects on business, but most of all the people, is undeniable. Air freight is going strong as ever and proves how essential it is for a globalized world. New innovations find their way into the market. Airports use the time to refurbish and improve their facilities. But some airlines won't make it through. And it's important to remember that behind any airline failure are thousands of lost jobs. The industry will survive, although it will look very different from what it is today. I'm Christoph from BongoPlanes, checking out for now.